Great.
Sean Harrell is the president of Integration Charter Schools on Staten Island in New York. ICS is a collection of 4 charter schools focused on fully integrating students with special needs and general education students. ICS's John Lavelle Preparatory Charter School was founded in 2009 as the first charter school on Staten Island. Sean has worked as a classroom teacher, assistant principal, and in school district administration for more than a decade. He founded and continues to serve as executive director of the Progressive Educators Group, which is a dynamic consortium of educators focused on both charter and independent schools, as well as youth development agencies. Sean is also an entrepreneur who in January 2022 founded the app EdSwipe, an innovative solution focused on teacher and school leader recruitment. I had a chance to meet Sean and visit Integration Charter Schools when I was in New York City recently, looking at all kinds of different kind of bottom-up innovative education solutions. Sean Harrell, welcome to the Liberated podcast.
Thank you so much, Carrie. So happy to be here.
Oh, I'm so happy to have you here. It was so thrilling to be able to visit ICS and see this wonderful learning environment that you've created for students. And I want to get more into ICS's vision and the practices that you currently engage in there. But before we do, maybe we could start a little bit with your background, Sean, of what made you interested in education to begin with? Why did you decide to build a career around education and then more recently move into education leadership?
No, certainly. So I like to say that I was kind of voluntold into education. I come from a family of educators. My grandmother was a phys ed teacher and school leader. My grandfather was a school leader, a science teacher, actually the first African-American dean of students at Sheepshead Bay High School in Brooklyn, and went on to become the head review officer for the New York City Department of Education. Uncles and aunts, all in the education circuit. So when I came out of college and did not know or question what I wanted to do, it was kind of an immediate response for me to go into the education world. And so I have always started as a classroom teacher, as you noted, and moved into becoming a dean, assistant principal, and principal. And I would say, when in the classroom space, I taught history more so in the humanities realm, but always at really innovative schools. I started at the NYC high school, a high school that was charged with rethinking high school for the 21st century. And I think it was no better platform for me than to use that as the jumping point for how I thought about teaching and learning overall. And while there, we saw immediate success where our students were really doing some out-of-the-box things, where rather than having us go through the notion or the things around traditional classroom settings in a global history class, we got them out in the world. We had them meeting with experts, and rather than me, Sean, the history teacher, assessing them, it was up to these people who were out in the world doing this work, assessing them. And so they would, one amazing course that we taught there was the memorial of 9/11, where our students Skyped and visited with students across the world to get their perspective on 9/11. And while doing that, they worked with the National 9/11 Memorial Museum to curate an exhibit of the teen experience of 9/11. And there's no better way that could happen than, really being hands-on and getting into the trenches. And so I used that as a launching point as I thought about what my career would be in school leadership, to think about what schools can look like, and how do we make other schools resemble the experiences that our students were getting at the iSchool. And so I had really amazing mentors from the iSchool who went on to start other schools, Victory Collegiate in Canarsie, Brooklyn, where I was brought on to be an associate head of school, kind of voluntold. That's another voluntold track. I had an amazing mentor who kind of tapped me and said, Sean, I think that you deserve more than this classroom space, and I want you out leading schools. And Marcel Deans did an amazing job of cultivating my leadership. And so went on to be the associate head of school there for 4 years. Had a district leader, Dan Fagelson, who is amazing. He's kind of written the way that we teach reading and writing. He's an original Lucy Calkins Fellow through the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project. He tapped me and said, Sean, I want you to come on my team and help us do teacher effectiveness across schools and help school leaders think about how they're implementing the new Danielson framework that was at that time. And I came on that journey with him. And so I led 38 schools through the process of teacher evaluation and innovative thinking in classroom spaces, innovative scheduling, programming. So my wheelhouse, I think if you would ask anyone, is really around how do we restructure the day to be innovative. Blocks of time where students can work independently or be out in the field doing this work. That's kind of in my wheelhouse. And so, yes, so I, that tap from Dan Fagelson to do that. And while doing that, an opportunity came from the state to kind of innovate a charter school in the South Bronx as a head of school. And so I jumped on board at the opportunity to do that without the red tape. As a district leader in the New York City Department of Education, there are so many things that you have to go through to really do some of this innovative work. Where I saw a charter school space as the opportunity to do all the things that I wanted to do without the hoops and hurdles that may sometime impact the time frame in which you're trying to do this work and the sense of urgency. And so I jumped on board with that, and we revamped and kind of did a renewal approach to a charter school in the South Bronx. We were immediately successful with accommodations from the state around where we took our Regents New York State high school assessment results. We beat out the district immediately on our first time out, and then use that as an opportunity to kind of replicate that in other schools. And so I started the Progressive Educators Group, where we consult with, we have over 12 organizations, but 7 particular charter schools, where we help them to rethink teaching and learning and the school environment and the space that they're in. And so we've had immediate success with that, opening and writing charter schools, helping them on school structure, curriculum and instruction, as I said before. And then this opportunity came the last February to jump on board or lead a charter network of schools looking to do out-of-the-box things with students with disabilities. And so I'm running a charter network of 4 charters, charged with an enrollment of 40% students with special needs. One of our schools, Richmond Prep, which opened last year, has taken on the charge of rethinking rethinking instruction for students that are on the spectrum. And so their focus is ASD, so as I said before, autism, and giving them that time to develop into their amazing selves. And so that's one of our schools. We have LaBelle, as you mentioned, which we're using the innovative charter model, where we have one teacher who's duly certified in both special ed and content, providing instruction to students. And we're supplementing that with teaching assistants who are in there on their track to actually becoming certified teachers, in there doing some targeted instruction with these students at simultaneously with that certified teacher. We have an early college school. So we have Nicocha Early College, which is we're a partnership with St. John's, where our students begin their college journey as early as 10th grade and get the opportunity to graduate with 60 college credits. These are students with disabilities, and in many cases may not be thinking college, but giving them that access to college courses immediately out the gate of coming into high school, saving families upwards of $60,000 to $70,000 of tuition. We've really seen some traction there. And then lastly, we have what David Frank, the former head of charter schools at the state, calls the #1 transfer school in New York State, which is our school New Ventures, which is for students who are overage and undercredited. And so you're seeing students anywhere from 16 to 21 coming back at their high school experience, gaining a high school diploma. We are using a model of networking and project-based learning to get students out in the field, very similar to some of the work that we were doing at the iSchool. But these students are seeing amazing success with 100% graduation rates across the board. So that's a little bit of my journey. And sorry, that was a very long-winded, but
oh, it was so great, Sean. No, what a great journey, and so interesting to hear your path, and now to be leading integrated charter schools. So as I mentioned in my introduction, I was recently in New York City visiting about a dozen innovative learning models, micro schools and self-directed learning centers and homeschooling collaboratives and low-cost private schools, sort of all kinds of out-of-the-box education models. And I have to be honest that when my friend Jenny Marcus, who's a homeschooling mom and microschool founder in Brooklyn, who's also been on this podcast before, suggested that I visit you all at Integrated Charter Schools, I was skeptical that I was going to find anything innovative, and a lot of it is admittedly my bias and my feeling that unfortunately charter schools seem to have become more standardized and kind of lost their experimental roots. So I went in kind of not knowing what to expect and was really just blown away by what I saw at ICS, that you are doing extraordinarily innovative things. That it seemed like a very learner-centered and teacher-centered environment, meaning that teachers seemed to have a lot of autonomy. There was a lot of joy, a lot of happiness. Both children and teachers seemed to have a lot of freedom. I walked into some of the elementary school classrooms and saw that kids were able to kind of be scattered on the ground. They didn't have to sort of be sitting at desks if they didn't want to be. They could, have that kind of freedom of movement. Partly, I suppose, because you are focused on a population of students with some learning disabilities or some IEPs, maybe ADHD and so on, but something that really, positively impacts all students in that environment where they do have that freedom of motion. And so the point is, it really exceeded my expectations, and I'm so thrilled to see what you're doing there. And I wonder if you can talk about, what you think is sort of your magic there. What is sort of the special sauce that leads to that innovative model at ICS?
Yeah, so I have to tote our environment speaks to that level of joy that you saw. And I think if you ask any child at our school, even, I always say the litmus tests for these things is when you ask a child what's the experience that they have. And I think they would echo that level of joy. They would echo joy and care for them. As before we think about the teaching and learning hat, we hone in on how do we wrap arms around the child. And I will tell you that a lot of what you're seeing or what you saw through your experience lends to my experience at having worked in a Montessori school. And I did leave that out in my intro, so I apologize there. That through the Progressive Educators group, I had the opportunity to consult with an independent school, Metropolitan Montessori, and then transfer into being a Montessori leader, a leader of that Montessori middle school. And we use a lot of the notions that you'll find in a Montessori environment around following the child, student-centered environment. And, we echo every conversation that we have at the leadership level on how do we ensure that that we're intentionally working on the child. And it is explicit to the child that they see how we are caring for them in the learning experience. So when you're seeing children maybe on the ground reading or at a desk that is of their height and the prepared environment, those are all really intentional practices that we're putting in place to ensure that the child understands the prescription for them in that environment at that time. And so you'll see that as early in the elementary school grades, and you'll see it even more when we think about that transfer school that we have around how do we know that you really thought about Sean in that case, and you thought about not just Sean in the learning environment, but the family dynamic that goes into that. And so you'll hear this line a lot around wrapping arms around children, as that's the approach that we're taking at ICS, and that's really what has helped to our success.
Wrapping arms around children. That's great, because during my brief visit at ICS, I saw kids coming up in the hallways, giving hugs to the teachers and to you, and then them being hugged in return. It's just really a happy place. You can tell that there's There is so much of that joy that comes through, and so wonderful that you've created that. So maybe we can go back to kind of this stereotype that I had in my mind around charter schools, which of course, when they were first proposed and began to be implemented in the 1990s, there was this sense that charters would be these incubators of innovation and experimentation, that they would have the freedom to try new things and have the autonomy to kind of avoid some of the restrictions that traditional district schools had. And there's a sense over the past several decades that some of that freedom, autonomy, and experimentation has been eroded. I think about, for example, an article that was published in National Affairs in 2015 by Checker Finn and Bruce Mano, where, and I'll quote from them here, they say, there's a certain sameness across much of the charter world, and save perhaps for virtual schools, not enough real innovation. The R&D quality of charters has eroded, along with the vision of the late Albert Shanker, longtime head of the American Federation of Teachers, that charters would emerge as teacher-created, teacher-run schools. What do you think about that? I mean, do you think that that is still more of the norm than the exception in today's charter schools, that they are more standardized? Or do you think that that is sort of a stereotype that needs to be smashed?
I believe it's a stereotype that needs to be smashed. What I will tell you is that over the years, you're seeing more and more innovative things come out of charter schools. And yes, I think when you think about some of the things that we have to go through, right? There are the non-negotiables of standardized testing and all those things there. And I think that charter schools oftentimes get lumped in with that thought or the thoughts of standardized testing. But how we're going about getting students over the hump is really individualized to the school. And I think when you look at integration charter schools, we are doing some really innovative out of the box things. Having students out in the field, 60% of their day in our transfer school. I don't know many schools that are doing that, or students who are working with organizations to help them think through big decisions in their businesses. I don't know many schools that are doing that. Or schools, anchored in, as I talked about earlier, Richmond Prep, where, these are students who are on the spectrum, and we talk about meeting them where they are. We see this focus definitely coming out of the lockdown, where students are really relying heavily on technology. And so how are we leveraging the learning that happened during that time to enhance the classroom space? We're really thinking about that in a very different way. And I think, though ICS is my heart, it's my anchor, it's my now, there are other schools doing some really great things out there around teaching time and learning, extended periods of time for students to think. Or, and not to throw them out there, but there's, Opportunity Charter School in Harlem, in South Harlem, that is also doing some great things with a population. They're very similar to us with, I think they anchor around 30 to 40% students with special needs. But they are giving them opportunities to have that prescriptive learning environment. And so I do think that it is a misnomer that needs to stop. And I think that we need to really open the doors and think about ways that we can kind of mirror some of the best practices that are happening in charter schools and match them with the district schools. And that's something that, so many of my friends are district leaders, and they constantly come to me with, how did you think about this? And I tell them, let's look at the regulation, all right? And let's look at what the regulation does not say, because that's where schools can really do some awesome things, is thinking in that gray space, because that's where the beauty is. The beauty is there and allows you to meet that student, and let's say the student is Sean, on the level to get him what he needs, and he really understands what's happening for him.
I'm so glad you've set the record straight, Sean, that charter schools are still innovating, that they are kind of achieving that original promise of experimentation and autonomy. I started my New York City visit, as I said, with ICS. I finished with the Wildflower Montessori charter schools in the South Bronx, and again, was wowed by what they're doing too. So I think you're right, and it's good to see that this is more common than not, and that charter schools really are kind of pushing forward to create new methods and models for teaching and learning, as again, they were intended to do. I wonder if we can talk a little bit more about your work with the Progressive Educators Group. Again, this consortium of private schools, charter schools, youth-focused nonprofit agencies focused around progressive education. How did that emerge, and why did you create that?
Yes. So I will tell you that when I was a classroom teacher, something that always bogged my mind was the amount of scheduling mishaps we would have. And, whether students should, in New York State, we're bound by seat time, and students needing to have 54 hours in a particular course in order to obtain credit. And I was a teacher where I would see students float in and out of my classroom. And so I wanted to really get a hold of like how scheduling happened in our particular school, but then think about how we can make it super beneficial for children. And so I went to my principal and I asked her if I could take this on. And she was like, Sean, rock out. No one wants to do scheduling. It is the biggest headache in education. And I took it and was really successful at it. My colleagues started a joke where they would call me Rain Man, as I would think how I would think about how scheduling can happen. The word got out that Sean was really good at scheduling. And if you wanted something that was out of the box, Sean could help you think through that. And so it started with me helping one school to helping two schools, district schools, actually, 1 to 2 district schools, to getting some traction with some bigwigs in the charter school office in New York City, who said, you may want to think about branching into helping some charter schools with this work. And I did that and saw a lot of traction there. And in 2018, talking to a liaison from the state said, you should really, get an LLC and make this a thing. And so I did that, and, took on a lot of the work that I was doing for free for these district and charter schools and took it to the next level. And so we started thinking about what the work that we were doing in terms of operations of schools, what that could look like in the instructional space. And so we help schools think through big picture learning projects, both problem and challenge-based learning modules. And beyond schools, we do this with nonprofits. One nonprofit that I'm extremely excited about the work that we did with the Harlem Educational Activities Fund. They're an organization that's been around for about 33 years, and they do supplemental educational services in ELA and math. And they came to me about 2.5 years ago, and asked, how could we, rethink this, what's happening in school? We want to unschool the school environment in our program. And I said, I got you. I am the master at unschooling. And so we took children on this, we call it challenge-based learning experience, where students spent the summer thinking about how they were going to get back to their communities. And so we used the elements of learning standards in the humanities and in STEM, and created these really avant-garde experiences where students would study an area in New York City, let's say Chinatown, and they would eat the food and meet with the people and be fully immersed in it. They would read text anchored in the community. They would interview based off of the text that they were reading. And then they would think about a problem to solve in that community. And so one prime example as I went through that space of Chinatown was, the immigration issues there. So how could we get this large number of immigrants access? And when we said access, it was an open definition of access to medical care, financial care, educational services. And children went on an exploration and met with leaders, both in the government space and in other nonprofits, to propose some potential solutions. And so that's the curriculum work that we did with Progressive Educators Group. That's one I like to hang my hat on. It was ridiculously successful. And we've done that with schools in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Atlanta. We're doing that with 5 charter schools in New York City. It's my passion work, actually. And it's led to me branching it into EdSwipe, which is the app that I created. That was my passion project during the pandemic. So often you see people swiping left and right on these dating apps. And I thought to myself, what if LinkedIn met Tinder as for educators, for leaders? And that's where we took it. But it's Progressive Educators, it's my baby, and we've seen amazing work come from it.
I love your entrepreneurial spirit and that you're solving problems, recognizing opportunities. One thing you said earlier, Sean, I think really stuck with me. You said kind of the beauty is in the gray area with charter schools, and that's really where the innovation and experimentation lie. So I wonder, what your sense is of the charter sector. Are you optimistic that it will continue to grow and flourish, or what are some of the challenges that you foresee and some of the roadblocks there?
So I'm extremely optimistic. We in New York State, we have a governor who proposed to raise the cap. So in New York City, we're at the cap of how many charter schools can open. And she sees some of the fruits of the work that's happening in charter schools and wants to raise that cap. I think it's indicative of I think it's over 100,000 families that are on wait lists for charter schools in New York City, that there is a want and there's a need for charter schools. And I said, beyond charter school, there's a want and a need for choice and options. And that's what's most important. Then, I think we can brush it with the charter school lens, totally fine. As long as it's giving families options and choice, that's what's needed. And so when I think about, my optimism, I'm extremely optimistic of the innovation and things that are coming out of charter schools, not just in New York City, I think nationally. There is a platform that's really giving students some great options and in terms of their educational experience. And so I do see there being even more innovative practices coming out. You visited Wildflower in the South Bronx, and they are rethinking, I think, even not just the Montessori learning environment, but just the structure of how schools exist, right? Is there a need for a principal? Can teachers take on this work? Those are the innovative things that charter schools are doing, right? Does this need to live with the traditional principal head of school model? Or can we give teachers leverage to really own the learning environment that they are signed up to work in? And so I see more of those opportunities coming to light.
I love your focus on choice, not just in the charter sector, but more broadly, kind of families having more education options. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what that looks like for you, kind of in your vision of an educational utopia. What might these sort of diverse options and choices for families look like?
Yeah. So I always say that I anchor the school experience in giving children what they need, when they need it, and how they need it. And that it does not necessarily need to live in a space where, 9 to 10 is ELA and 11 to 12 is math, because that does not resemble the world that we are operating in outside of a teaching and learning space, a school, right? Outside of those walls of a school, no one is stopping and saying, I'm doing math for this amount of time. And so I see schools really leveraging that and having students think about, so what is my purpose? Where do I live in this world? How do I show up? And then how do I ensure that I leave my footprint? And not just footprint. I like to say to my students, I love that you leave your heart print. Because your heart print that you're leaving on the world is more and more important, that you're leaving it better than how you found it. And schools creating spaces to do that. And if that's through the STEM lens that you're seeing some charter schools take on, there's like Richard Isquero in the South Bronx that is a charter school focused on medical professions. And if that's how those children are going to leave their heart print on the world, is through their passion for STEM and science, I think that's great. There's Urban Dove, which is a charter school that's anchored in sports and athletics and allows students the opportunity to take on that passion for sports and athletics through their core classes. One amazing school that opened I think last year, the Earl Monroe Basketball School, for students who have a real big passion in basketball. And they spend a portion of their day learning about not just the basketball court, but the back of the house. What does it mean to be an agent for a basketball star? What does it mean to run Madison Square Garden or to manage the Brooklyn Nets? I see more and more of those spaces needing to happen for children to say, at the end of it, if they want to go into that realm, absolutely. But if at the end of the 4 years, and I'm thinking in a high school space, at the end of the 4 years, a child comes to you and says, I never want to see a basketball again, I love that, right? Scratch that off the list of 2 million things that you can go into and do, right? And so I see that marriage of passion work, really leveraging, I say passion work in more like idea lab spaces, leveraging the schools that need to exist moving forward.
I think that's great. And what about access? Because of course, charter schools are tuition free. What is your sense of kind of expanding these choices so that families do have more options beyond an assigned district school so that they have greater access?
Yeah, I think we need to really think about where charter schools exist in communities. In New York State, Betsy Rosa, our head of state education, made a comment a few weeks ago around, why do you find that a lot of charter schools exist in low income areas? And though this notion comes out sometimes that charter schools really anchor themselves in that space, I think charter schools, for me, anchor themselves in an access for everyone. And we just need to get the word out there. Something that we're doing at Integration Charter Schools is really thinking about where do all of our children come from? As our schools run the gamut of low income, from the North Shore of Staten Island to Mid Island and South Shores, we have, I like to call our schools the tale of two cities. And how do we ensure that families both in both spaces or all across Staten Island see us as a viable option? So what do our recruitment and marketing spaces lend to that meet those families where they are so that they see us as an option? And I think that's something that district schools really struggle with at times, giving the backing of recruitment and marketing and branding efforts that need to go into telling your story. And so when I think about that access and the options for families, it's more so anchored in how are we ensuring as school leaders that parents really understand our why and how we're going about doing it, and that we're going into spaces that afford them the opportunity to hear our message.
And so from a policy perspective, that might look like lifting caps on charter schools in certain states. I would also kind of push beyond just the charter sector to choice more generally and encouraging education savings accounts that give families access to a state percentage of education funding to use on whatever education options that they see fit for their child, and really kind of create this ecosystem of choice that looks like district schools, charter schools, independent schools, micro schools, homeschooling collaboratives, all kinds of things, and models that we haven't yet discovered, right? That haven't yet been invented, right? I think that when we can truly kind of decentralize education, we'll be impressed with this ingenuity that comes from that. And already we can see that with ICS and the success that you've had there in really reimagining teaching and learning and creating this joyful space. So, I wonder, Sean, how could people learn more about integrated charter schools and connect with you and learn more about your work?
Yes. So the best way to do that is via our website. And so you can log on to our website, which is www.integrationcharterschools, that's schools plural.org, O-R-G. And, information on how to connect with us is all there. Our social handles on Instagram, we are Integration Charter Schools, at Integration Charter Schools, as well as on Facebook as well, at Integration Charter Schools. And so there's a great mechanisms to see the work that we're doing, how we're archiving that work, and how you could potentially be a partner for us.
Sean Harrell, thank you again for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you so much, Carrie.